So, welcome everyone to take two of our attempt to do a webinar. I'm here now with Tom Webb-Skinner, who's a resourcing manager from British Transport Police. He'll introduce himself in a moment. If you're watching this on the recording, then you're very welcome as well. And if you're watching this live, then you're super welcome, and you should be able to access a chat function in this webinar. So if you've got any questions, dig out the chat function and ask away. But I've got a pile of questions here for Tom. I'm not sure how many of them we'll get through. And for those of you who haven't met me yet, I'm Brendan from Bluelight, and over the past several years I've been coaching and supporting people for the police recruitment process. So with a considerable amount of success, a good conservative number of 4,000 plus people are in the police service as a result of my support. So if you'd like to find out a little bit more, check out the Facebook group. I know a lot of you will be watching this from the Facebook group, so you're incredibly welcome. I know a lot of you tried to watch it last night. We lasted about 6 minutes, didn't we, Tom? And that was it all collapsed.
Yeah, but it was a good 6 minutes, Brendan.
Yeah, but anyway, so I'll let Tom introduce himself and then we'll get on with the webinar.
Cool, thank you. So I'll say what I said yesterday, really, because I said something that I wasn't planning to say, but I think it was a good point. So my name is Tom Webb-Skinner. I'm resourcing manager at British Transport Police. So I'm responsible for all of our recruitment. Happy to answer any questions about any roles that we recruit for. But I'm also a special constable for BTP based at Birmingham New Street. And what I said yesterday that I'm going to repeat is that being a special is a really great thing to do. So I appreciate that most people watching this are going to be thinking about a career in policing. If you are so much as thinking about it, I would really, really encourage you to be a special. It is a great try before you buy. There's nothing wrong with approaching specialing as being a try before you buy. It's a huge change to your life being a police officer, so it's a good way to figure out if it's for you. So that's my pitch for that done. But we come back to that if you've got any questions. Obviously, I've got your questions from earlier, Brendan, but obviously any that come up, I'll do my best to answer them. Worst case scenario is I say I don't know that, and I'll come back and answer, and I will come back and answer for you. But let's see what we can do.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Tom. Actually, I'll sort of reinforce that message that the special constabulary is a great way of trying before you buy. It's a good way of finding out what the culture of the force is that you want to join, what values they have, whether you're going to be a good fit. Because it's not for everyone being a police officer. So it's a good opportunity to just see, is this for me? In terms of developing your skills for the recruitment process for most forces, it's valuable for that as well. I'd also add that I think doing a little bit more than just being a special constable, because often with a lot of forces, you'd just be running from job to job on response, and it doesn't give you the opportunity to really do good quality problem solving or the sort of decision making or managing change that forces might be looking for, and I'm quite sure BTP are looking for those sort of skills as well. So I often recommend that people, on top of that, or maybe instead of that, look to volunteer for things like homeless charities or Samaritans or any charitable organisation that looks to support people with mental health problems.
Do you know what, Brenda, actually, sorry, just you've made me think of something really valuable there. A lot of people, especially younger people that are looking to apply, say things to me like, I don't have much experience. And they often talk about, career experience. I would always place above that voluntary experience or even travelling or any kind of just gaining life experience, because that's really what we're looking at. And a lot of people do think about, employers, and that is valuable. But what you've just said there about volunteering, for me, is the pinnacle of what you can do if it's not within your gift of magic up a career history.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this can start before you're 18. So a lot of forces now, I know BTP as well, will recruit at 18. There's many forces out there now who will allow you to apply at 17. And I get people saying, well, I've not had a job, so how will I have the prerequisite experience to get into the police? Well, listen, I joined at 20, but I'd already served 2 years in the reserves for the Royal Navy. I'd been a scout. I'd supported, when I was in sixth form college, I'd supported a local school. Every week I'd go once a morning to help as a classroom teacher. This is back in the day before we had DBS checks. But I put myself out there in the community, doing things as a volunteer. And I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of young people will say, well, I've got no experience. And I delve deeper and find that they've done their Duke of Edinburgh. You know, and I know
Yeah.
most forces will look at things like Duke of Edinburgh and think, yeah, you know, you've got to really perform badly in this interview not to get in. So, you know, Tom, I'm so with you there, Tom, that volunteering, because if you think about Sir Robert Peel and how he intended the police service of the United Kingdom to be back in 1829, you know, he talked about the police being the public being the police just being members of the public who are paid full time to carry out a role which is incumbent on all citizens in the interests of, and this is the special part, community welfare and existence.
Absolutely.
You're doing something to improve the welfare of the community and make it the best version of itself it can be, then that's gold in terms of applying for the police. Anyway, Tom, we'll push on. I'm seeing that there's no one actually asking any questions in the chat, so I hope there's people actually watching this. Oh, there are. So, my goodness, I've got some questions for Tom, but Callum has just posed a question here. Can you see them in your? Can you see them, Tom?
Yeah, I can. Did you want to read it out? Or?
Yeah, I'll read it out for Tom. So, hi Tom, I've got a great desire to become a police officer for BTP. However, I have not yet started the application process as I'm concerned about being rejected for my caution history from when I was 18 years old. I have 10 years life experience and a great career. Would this be taken into consideration when reviewing my application, as I do not resemble my younger self? Do you know, Callum, that's a really good question, and a lot of people may have had a little hiccup in their life, but it depends what the hiccup is, and I'll let Tom explain that a little bit more. But
yeah,
after 10 years, it changed their lives. So, Tom, over to yourself.
Yeah, that's a really, really common question. So there are two things to consider. Firstly, the only thing that will stop you from applying is having had a custodial sentence, and that's quite simple. So the answer is, can you apply? Yes, you absolutely can, and those are national guidelines. Obviously, you still need to pass a vetting process, and you kind of need to ask yourself that question, if I'm being honest. We can always give you guidance, but it is guidance. Until you go through a vetting process, I can't preempt what the answer will be. It's also worth bearing in mind that different forces do have slightly different risk appetites in terms of what they will accept. So there's never really a black and white answer. So use your common sense. So if the cautions or convictions are recent, if they're violent or sexual, if they involve, large sums of money, alluding to sort of bribery possibilities, things like that, then maybe rule yourself out. And I'm going to be honest about that. However, if it is, a drunken disorderly from 10 years ago or something like that, realistically, no, that's not going to be an issue. But I will never give anyone a black and white answer, because there's always a lot of factors to consider. When you go through a vetting process, they look at so many different things. It's not, by the way, just criminal history. Your financial background is another really key one. And actually, certainly over the last few years, with everything that's happened in terms of the economy and so on, that picture's changed quite a lot. So a lot of people do have debts. Having debt isn't necessarily an issue, but not being able to pay that debt is. So there's lots of things to consider. So I would just say, use your common sense. Do you think it's not a particular risk to us? Because we're probably going to agree with you. But equally, if it's 10 cautions for GBH and there were 2 years ago, then probably not. But the sounds of what you've said, I reckon it's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That's this is a common question that crops up, and like you, I can't answer it because you won't know until you go through vetting, and vetting is at the end of the process for most forces.
Yeah.
But some of the things that people have failed on vetting for are things like a caution for a street robbery when I was 15. It's a robbery, it's involved violence or the threat of violence. It's a dishonesty offence, and that can often preclude you. If you'd like to find out a little bit more, Avon and Somerset Police have got a really good guide on this, because the national guidance is sometimes a bit complex, but Avon and Somerset Police have done a really, really good guide on this. So
I've seen that.
If you Google vetting, police vetting, Avon and Somerset Police, it'll bring it up. It's a PDF document. It's also in the Facebook group. So for those of you who are part of the Facebook group, and if you'd like to join that group, it's just searching under groups for police recruitment, support, Bluelight Consultancy, and you'll find it. I posted a copy in there under files. Really, really simply explains it, because it can be a bit complicated. The other thing to watch out for on vetting as well is, I remember one guy posting in the Facebook group saying he can't understand why he keeps failing on vetting. And within 5 minutes, someone said, well, I've just looked at your Facebook history and I can tell you why, mate. Comments, a comment about how the Craig brothers weren't so bad after all. They were just, they were nice guys, so they got a bit involved in a bit of crime, but, I admire them. So as well as the sexist comments, there's also some comments which had racial overtones and some photographs of this individual involved in an English Defence League march.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, seriously, and you want to be a police officer? I was a police officer 28 years, retired as an inspector, very proud of my service. There's absolutely no way I would entertain working with someone like that. So, failed on thing, yeah, and not surprisingly, everyone else sort of agreed, and 5 minutes later he left the group.
And actually, just very briefly, the other thing that a lot of people do fail vetting on isn't necessarily what's happened, it's being dishonest about it. So you might have something that, like I've just said, is not desirable, it's not going to stop you joining. But if you don't tell us about that, that's going to be taken as you deliberately trying to hide it. And for that reason, because honesty and integrity is so important in policing, for that reason alone, you'll fail. So it's always better to be honest. And if you don't know the ins and outs, be as honest as you can. It's about displaying that you have made an attempt to say, I have this history, here it is. Whether it's a day or a month out of whenever it might have been is not the issue. It's just trying to demonstrate you try to be honest.
Yeah, and don't forget, folks, they're the police. This is what they do. Don't think you can think, oh, they're not going to find out about that caution from them.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, they will. Oh, it's a rehabilitation of offenders. I don't have to declare it anymore. Oh, yes, you do. So there's no way around it. All right, okay, let's move on. There's a question here from Hawaii, but I think Hawaii Nova 5T. My goodness, what great names. I'm going to hold on to that one for a moment because I've got some questions for Tom here. And here's one that I think you'll like, folks. What 3 things make British Transport Police stand out from other forces?
So I think it's one thing that is displayed in lots of different ways, and that is the railway environment in which we work, which sounds like such an obvious point, but if you don't understand what that means, then you won't quite understand just how different we are. So I'll pick up on a few. So firstly, we have the stakeholders that we work with. So obviously, we work to serve the public, absolutely. But we have stakeholders that we work with on a day in, day out basis, the train operating companies, freight operating companies and so on, who quite literally pay for our wages, as people like to say all the time. Now, that doesn't mean that we get bossed around by them and they say go down to platform 2 and whatever. It doesn't work like that, but it doesn't mean that we're conscious of the fact that we have this sort of almost symbiotic relationship with them and that they are our customers and vice versa. And there is that slightly more commercial way of thinking in BTP and being responsive to their needs. We are here to keep the railway network running, and we play a really vital role in that. So it's important to understand that. That working environment is also quite dangerous sometimes, and people don't realise that. Being on a railway track is extremely dangerous, and for obvious reasons you shouldn't do it, but sometimes we have to. And there is a lot of training that we get about how to operate safely in a railway environment, so that's one thing. There's also a really big piece around vulnerability, suicide, mental health, all that sort of a quite broad blanket. The railway environment is a magnet for people like this. I can't tell you why, whether it's public places and accessibility to possible places to kill yourself, to put it in the bluntest way, or what, I don't know, but it is. So you come across that probably a little bit more than you would elsewhere. And then also at the really sharp end of that, there's dealing with fatalities that happen on the railway, and that's not something that people always necessarily realise. But then there's also a lot of positives. I think because of the slightly more specific environment in which we work, we have a more defined community. So we do work more along the lines of that traditional sort of Bobby on the beat that people like to think about. So you do get sort of see a case through from end to end. You do get to engage with your community. And that's something that a lot of people are interested in. And for people that have maybe been in the job a while, the reason that they joined the police in the first place. And that's something that you can do with us. So all of that for me stems back to the railway environment in which we work.
Wow, great answer, Tom. Thank you. And actually, I think that's something people need to be really cognizant of when they apply for British Transport Police. Because I sometimes hear people saying, oh, I'm going to apply to a Home Office force, I'm going to apply for BTP, I'm going to apply to be a PCSO in somewhere. And I just think, actually, do you know what your vision for your future is going to look and feel like? Because if you're just doing this blanket application just to wear a police uniform, I'm not quite sure if the force you're applying to is going to appreciate that. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
No, I think that's true. I think there is nothing wrong with wanting to be a police officer for its own sake. You know, it is a vocation, and it is a bit of a calling for a lot of people. But if you apply to the wrong force for you, you could be really disappointed. And forces are different. I truly do believe it is horses for courses. I don't think it is the fact that one police force is better than another, or a certain type of work is better than another. But you need to understand what that particular force does, what kind of jobs do they deal with, what's their culture like, and so on. So as to know whether you're going to get anything out of it. And there's a question you gave me to answer later about, you know, what it is to be fulfilled in your career, and that is really key in that.
Yeah, great. I'll come to that one later, Tom, because I think there's a big difference. We've talked about this before, but between sort of success. You know, what does success mean for my career?
Sure.
And fulfillment, because I think success without fulfillment is a bit of an empty career, or one that's not quite got the meaning that you hope it would. So I'll come to that later. That's something I'm very keen to make sure our followers and the people who are watching this webinar realise that actually what's going to fulfill you in terms of your future. All right, let's go back to a question from one of our, from the chat here. So we've got this question here from Hawaii Nova 5T. I love some of the names that you get on these chats here. Hi Tom, what can you recommend for required reading before you start initial training? There you go, that's a good question.
Okay, so we will give you some light reading before you start, and that is some real basics. So Human Rights Act, plain, which if you're not familiar with, you certainly will be soon. But it is some basics. I would probably not try and overload yourself too much. Your initial training is really full on. We will obviously, or I hope obviously, give you everything you need during that training. So I would probably trust in that. If you want to do anything, I would maybe try and speak to some officers that are currently working for that force to say, you know, I'm joining, maybe even the station that you're going to join. You know, I'm going to be with you in 6 months' time. You know, who is everyone? What's it like? That sort of thing, to give yourself more sort of confidence than anything else, and put yourself at ease. But in terms of, you know, law or anything like that, I wouldn't do it, because I think you're just putting yourself too much of an unnecessary challenge when it's going to be hard as it is. So do whatever it is you think is going to make you feel more comfortable. But for me, I would say familiarise yourself with the organisation and if you can, the station.
Yeah, great answer, Tom. Thank you. I'll reinforce that as well, because I think once you start, you don't want trainers having to undo your misunderstanding of bits of legislation.
Yeah.
The code of ethics. I mean, there's some things that you do need to, I think, yeah, code of ethics, yes, definitely. But Police and Criminal Evidence Act, trying to understand that before you join, not really, you know, not yet.
Yeah.
Things like the code of ethics, you know, that should be in your DNA by the time you apply. There's enough for you to do in terms of researching the force without you having to delve into legislation as well. So get to the point where on the first day, you're walking in thinking, yeah, this is just how I imagined it. This is just how I thought it was going to be, because all your research has led to this moment where you understand the culture, you understand the force, you know who the chief officers are, what they stand for, what the divisional commanders have been saying in the local press. As one of my old colleagues said once, you know, to what extent can they just plug in? To what extent can they plug into our force, our culture? So I think there's enough to do there. Alrighty, folks. Well, listen, I'm going to ask some more questions from the chat in a moment, but let's just see what other questions we've got from my big long list. And like I said, it's a big long list. I'm not quite sure if we're going to get through all of these, but
Right.
So let's just see. Here's one I like. So when people join British Transport Police, what's the one thing they are amazed the most by?
So I'm not sure whether amazed is necessarily the word for some of my responses, but I think there are two sides to what people are kind of taken aback by, or surprised by, or indeed amazed by. There's positives and negatives. So on the positives, I think I sort of touched on it before, the specialism of the work that we do. I don't think people genuinely realise just how specialist it is until they do it. And until they start to undertake the training. And as I mentioned before, even things just as simple, I say simple, but as simple as working in the railway environment, you know, that is interesting. There are some really specific skills there. You know, we have all the same training that a Home Office force does, plus a lot of railway specific stuff. And that is, as I mentioned, working in that environment, but also the bylaws, and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's something that people are not always expecting. Also mentioned briefly that kind of Bobby on the beat sort of thing. You do get to see a case through end to end more often than you would in a home office force. And I think that's quite appealing to people. I don't think they're necessarily expecting that. They are expecting to be rushing from job to job, and don't get me wrong, there are moments when that happens, but more often than not, you can see something through. But I think for me, and as I say, this is where maybe amaze isn't the word, but I think it's more maybe the negatives. And again, I mentioned it briefly before, things like fatalities. If you're not expecting to deal with that when you come into BTP, you're going to have a really rude awakening. And there's no two ways of putting it. And it is something you have to be aware of. Ultimately, who picks up the bodies? It's you. There's no two ways of me phrasing that. And unfortunately, we've got to put it in these blunt terms, because the worst thing that could possibly happen is you go through all this process, all your training, and then you suddenly find yourself stood in a train line having to deal with this. And that would be awful. Now, don't get me wrong, there's loads of support around this, both in terms of your health and well-being, and I think we'll talk about that later, but also in terms of the training to deal with this properly. But you need to realise that that's something that we do. And it isn't the same as what you might be expecting to deal with in a home office force. You can see really nasty things in policing. You really can. And it's not normal to have to see these things. But I would suggest to you that with BTP, it's that particularly sort of sharp end of things when you're dealing with some of the fatalities that occur on the railway. So I know it's not a particularly sort of nice point, but you do have to labour it a little bit, because I really want to hammer that home to people. Because as I say, the worst thing to happen would be that you don't realise you're doing it until you're dealing with it.
Yeah, no, Tom, we touched on this last night when we had a go at this webinar. I remember as an inspector years ago, hearing a job come over the radio. It was a train en route into Stockport where someone had committed suicide by jumping in front of it. And you're not going to survive that. And my officers were there first at the scene before British Transport Police. And, by the way, British Transport Police came along and did an outstanding job. But I remember over the radio, one of my officers saying, could we send the undertakers or whatever BTP use, because we really need them. And the sergeant piped up over the radio saying, well, how do you know they're dead? As a paramedic sort of declared death yet? And he said, well, I don't need him to. I've got half his head by my foot, and there's bits of body all over the place, Sarge. I don't need to be a doctor. He's dead. And I remember that his voice was quivering. It was. You could hear the emotion in his voice. And when he came back, and the rest of the team who were there, we arranged for some sort of crisis counselling straight away, because how do you go home and explain that? Oh, hi darling, how was your day? Oh, just a few hours ago I had bits of dead body all around me and half a head at my foot. How do you explain that? And the same for home office forces as well. A lot of people seemed a bit shocked sometimes when I talk about how the fact is you're going to deal with lots of people who are dead. You're acting on behalf of the coroner, and you've got a really important job to make sure that this death is not suspicious. And you've got to ask difficult questions, and you've got to check the body. And this might be someone who's been dead for a few hours, or it might be someone who's been dead for a few months. Either way, it's your responsibility. Now, you'll get bags of support from the force, but look, in terms of the drip trauma, or sometimes the big trauma, this is the stuff that's going to impact on you for the rest of your life. There's no way around it.
Yeah, and I think
not normal. Who else has to deal with dead people all the time?
No, it isn't, and I think it's really important. And if it's all right with you, maybe we'll move on to that question about welfare. So it'd be nice to sort of round this off. But I think it's important to say that it isn't normal. And what we're not expecting you to do is to come in and act like it's normal, and to think that it's normal, and to have the ability to work as if it's normal, because it isn't. But that's why the welfare and well-being is so important.
Yeah, good. And that's improved hugely over the years. Back in the 80s and 90s, it was very much a sense of, toughen up, hard edge. You're in the police, you're wearing a uniform. And it wasn't okay to be not okay, but now it's okay to be not okay. And it's okay to go to your sergeant or your colleagues and saying, I'm not. And it's not, it's, I just don't know why. And the support is there. And I think it's incredible now, the amount of support that's there. All right, let's go back to some of the questions from the chat room. We've got someone there, John, saying, I'm on my way with my application, but struggling with the last part for PCSO. I'm not quite sure if we can answer that one, Tom. The last part for PCSO, is that resonating with you?
The last part of the application is this. I don't know if I can see the question.
It doesn't say any more than that, so it might be a bit...
I don't know if you maybe mean the if you're talking about the actual application itself, and you mean just the last question on the application. I can't obviously tell you how to answer the question. I would just say, a bit of advice, it does give you a word count for each question. That is indicative of what we're expecting you to say. So if you notice that there's 4 parts, the first part says 100 words and the second one says 250, we're probably looking for you to labour the point a little bit more on the second one. So if you are talking about that, then I would say use that as a guide for how much you've got to say. I would also say look at when the application closing date is. I don't know if you can hear my dog drinking water there. Sorry if you can. Look at when the application closing date is, and don't put undue pressure on yourself to get it in before then. Take your time and fill in that application, at your own leisure. But if there are particular things you're unsure about, then drop us an email, and I'll mention it now, and hopefully I'll remember to mention it again later. It is just recruitmentteam@btp.pnn.police.uk. Any questions you've got about anything, drop an email there, and one of my team can get back to you. So I hope that helps, but if you've got anything more specific, feel free to ask again.
Yeah, no, good point made there, Tom. And the thing is, folks, Tom can't tell you what to say. It's the same way I say with my clients. Look, I can show you the structures, I can show you how to answer a question, but ultimately, you've got to do the hard work. And it is hard work, and it's a labour of love, your application form, because you're presenting yourself to court as a potential candidate, and that it needs time, it needs effort, it needs thought, and don't just think because it says 250 words, I can write 245 words of absolute dross. You've got to have quality in there, some depth to you, some breadth to you, something that's going to tell the story of you, a narrative about you, not just a load of cliches that you've read in a book somewhere. Because
no, and actually, really, really worth avoiding anything like cliches. I hear a lot of answers to questions in interviews and applications that are similar because we lead similar lives. So people talk about things they've done in sporting groups or work scenarios and this sort of stuff, and that's absolutely fine. But rarely I can answer or I thought that sounds the same as one I've read before. There's always a difference to it. So, it's about what you can bring. We're looking to assess competencies. We're not looking for you to say you've done something specific. It's just about demonstrating the competencies. So for me, what the competencies are, and then say, what have I done in my life that meets those competencies?
Oh, I think we lost you a little moment there, Tom. This feels like... Yeah, got most of that. You went off towards the end. It's a bit like with the coronavirus at the moment, and all the interviews on television. They're always losing people going in and out, but it's a new normal we're in at the moment. Now, so building on that as well, I imagine recruiters must get sick of seeing things like, I just want to help my community, put something back. No 2 days are the same. Look, that doesn't help tell a story of you. Tell your real, authentic and emotional story. And because that's what they want. They're not interested in how many buzzwords you can use from the competency and values framework, or how many cliches you can come up with, because that is not going to impress them, either application form stage or interview. Don't use words that you wouldn't normally use, because especially at the interview, you're going to have a serving officer there who's going to be looking at you thinking, look, the final question that's in my head is, can I see myself working with them in the future? And if you're talking like someone who's capable of reciting the competency and values framework, they're not going to be interested. I've never heard an interviewer come out of an interview and say, that can't be. They know the CVF inside and out. And they could tell me all the phrases from it. Wonderful. No, what did I say? I mean, Tom, that's a good question here. Let's move on to this one. What things are going to impress a recruiter, an interviewer? When they come out of an interview, what are the things they like to say about the candidates that they just are amazed by?
I think that it's people who have understood the CVF competencies and how they apply to them as an individual. It's what we were just talking about. So my advice to people, and this is true for nearly any officer interview, whether it's an initial PC interview or a promotions board or anything, is to look at what the competencies are and come up with a few examples, 2 or 3, of how you have met that competency at some point in your career. Because if you do that, whatever question we ask you, you should be able to answer it, because the questions are based on the competency. So don't try and second guess what kind of question we might ask, because they're all based on the CVF. So I tend to find people that have really, gone away and done that. And, one of the lovely things I get to do in my job is to tell people that they've passed interviews. And sometimes, particularly when the score has been quite high, I will say to them, so, whatever you've done has paid off. How did you prepare? And so often people will say, I've gone through this in my head. I've read back the presentation several times. I've written out examples. And it's those people. So they'll come out and say, a few different things, but similar things. I was really good, had lots to say about this, didn't leave me, wondering what it is he had done, and all these sorts of things. And I think also that's why part of your research has got to be around your actual interview technique. So you'll hear things like star format quite a lot, and it gets a bit naff going over it again and again and again. It's not that we like to hear it in that way, it makes no difference, but it forces you to talk in a way that's a little bit unnatural. You don't normally talk in the way that we expect you to talk in a police interview. And it just forces you to provide more detail than you normally would. So a lot of the time, I have an interview with someone who's quite good, and I would probably, if it worked like this and it doesn't, I'd say, yeah, fine, you're in. But if they don't provide the evidence, then there's nothing we can do. We're not going to assume that you've done something. We're not going to assume that you've got that competency. You need to provide evidence of it. So it's the people that have gone away, researched the CVF, thought about how they meet it, practiced some answers, because then when they get into that environment, A, they're more confident anyway, but B, they've got that content to deliver.
Absolutely, because I might sound like a broken record from me, but the hard work is in the rehearsal. Rehearse it, practice it. Don't just write it down, because knowledge and understanding is fine, but experience trumps it every day of the week. So practice. Get your friends and loved ones to sit opposite you on a little panel and ask you these questions. And like Tom said, it's not like telling your friend in a pub about what you did at work today. I kind of build on that STAR framework, because I think a lot of people get confused about the difference between task and action. So very, very quickly, take a look at the situation, make it really specific, describe what your role is, set the scene. You've got about 5 minutes to answer this. Describe the problem. If it's not a specific problem, then why are you talking about it? Mm-hmm. Talk about the impact it's had on you and on others, so that the interviewer can sense that you can see things from other people's perspectives. And then don't say that, the task I set myself. No one talks like that. So what's up with aim? So, my aim was, or what I was hoping to achieve. No, that's how people talk. So what I was hoping to achieve is, and I thought about different ways of doing it. One way was this, one way was this, and one way was this. And I chose actually this way. And the reason I chose this way was because. And so what I did, and then avoid things like, so I went and spoke with them. Because what does spoke mean? The interviewer wants to hear about how you set the scene for the conversation, what sort of questions you asked, and why did you ask the question?
Or worse still, we. That's my pet.
Oh, absolutely. Then what we did, and then what
Who is we? But it's a really natural way of talking, because you do that. In conversation, you say, oh, then what we did, and you mean you, but if you don't say I, then I don't know that it's you, and I'm going to assume that it wasn't. So it's always I. It's what I did.
Yeah, so absolutely. So get the detail, and even down to things like, the first question I asked them was, so how are you feeling at the moment? Because I could sense that they were upset about something. And there's no point in me saying, so how do you think I should address this on your behalf? Because it's emotional. That's the sort of it. I mean, I can see Tom nodding now as if, this is the sort of thing they're looking for. And then describe the result. And don't try and make out that everything you touch turns to gold. Because if this was something that's a challenging, difficult thing for you to deal with, as an interviewer, I'd be expecting you to be saying, didn't quite work out. It didn't quite work out how I hoped it. And when I reflected on this and talked about it with one of my friends, what I realised was that X, Y, and Z happened. So what I do differently next time is A, B, and C. And so that's the sort of, I think that's the sort of thing you're looking for, aren't you, Tom? Without sort of...
Yeah, correct. And I think also, just off the back of that very briefly, I think most of the time it's the simplest answers that are the best ones. You know, the reality is we all lead fairly similar, relatively banal lives. We're not expecting you to come in and talk about the time that you defused the bomb and saved the Queen and all this sort of business. It will be similar, as I said, similar sorts of situations about, you know, sport teams, work, all that sort of stuff. And that's perfectly fine. Those examples are always the best ones because they're more true to life. You can talk about them in more detail. It's much easier. We're not looking for you to impress us with, you know, the things that you've done in your life. We're looking for you to demonstrate competencies, and it's that simple. Yeah,
you've just reminded me of something, actually. My inspectors board has just flashed through my mind. It was, oh my goodness, it's like 15 years ago or something, but I can still remember, you know, they asked me a question about a difficult decision I'd made, and I gave an example of a firearms incident where I utilised the AFOs, the authorised firearms officers, through the bronze commander in the control room to execute a hard stop, and how, you know, that was a difficult decision. It scored, I thought that was a real Gucci answer, that. And it scored me the lowest marks because all I did was follow force policy. I didn't make any difference at all. I just followed force policy and I did it very well. And there was a bit of fallout with the neighbours who were upset about what they saw. But I dealt with it. Now, the answer that scored me the highest was the one at the time I was thinking, oh God, I'm not sure if this is going to work. But I talked about how one of my acting sergeants was struggling at a hospital to deal with a dispute over custody of a child, and it was causing issues in an accident and emergency, and I went along to support him, and I described how I supported him and how I liaised with the staff at the hospital, and how I gave him feedback later, and that scored, you know, I was thinking, oh God, I'm fishing around for, you know, I should have had a better answer than this. That scored me the highest, and I think it was because there was an emotional connect there, as opposed to just following policy. This was something where there was no policy. It was just my skills, my values, and that sort of thing. And that scored me the highest marks on my interview board. I passed it, but the one I scored the lowest on was the one I thought was a Gucci answer. You know, I talk about this hard stop that the firearms team did. It's quite an aggressive tactic, and it was just forced policy. Big deal, they probably sat there thinking, yeah, you and hundreds of inspectors could do that, but what you did at the hospital, actually, that was very special. You supported one of your sergeants who was struggling in a way that enabled him to save face and you know, keep his respect as a sergeant going. So, yeah, Tom, that's interesting now. Anyway, let's move on. I can go off on all sorts of tangents. So those of you who know me know that I do that. So let's go to, let's go to a question here. So from Carwin. Hi, Brendan and Tom. I'm through to the assessment centre PCSO with BTP. Well done. And I've been told I'll be invited to it in May. However, I've seen a few posts in the Bluelight Facebook group that some BTP applicants are getting phone/web interviews instead of coming down to London due to COVID-19. Will I get a phone web interview, or will I still need to come down to London for the AC? Good question, actually. So how are we managing recruitment during COVID-19? And does BTP still want to recruit?
Day by day is how we're managing it. So yeah, I've managed to see some of these questions now. There's a lot of questions about the telephone interviews and assessment centres that we're doing. So we are pretty confident that we can do everything that we need to virtually, and that where we can't, we accept a level of risk or ask candidates to do that. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to accept that risk. So, for example, we can't take biometric vetting samples. So if you were to go on to fail vetting, your employment would be terminated. I'd say if it was serious enough for that to happen, then that's the right decision anyway. But there will be an element of candidates accept. You don't have to do that though, but it's just worth putting out there. But we can go from application to onboarding without having to see people face to face. Not ideal, and I dare say it is, but what we don't want to do is stop. You know, we need to keep moving. We don't know how the situation is going to develop. You know, if you'd asked me 3 weeks ago what we'd be doing, I wouldn't have even predicted half of this. So where we're going to be in 3 weeks, I've no idea. I think you said that your date in the question was May, so potentially and hopefully we might even be back to normal by then. But for everyone else in the meantime, and until told otherwise, It's exactly the same as it would have been face-to-face on the phone. I am actively trying to see if we can do that by video as well. Something to tell you right now, though, is if you're going to join the police, you're not going to have tons of Gucci technology, and it won't always be very reliable. So what I don't want to do is overpromise and underdeliver, but what I can do is telephone interviews. And in many ways they're not ideal, but for some people they're probably going to be better because they'll be a little bit less intense. You're in your own home and so on. But the actual interview itself is exactly the same. And everything else, you know, we can either do or accept an element of risk around, but it will all be explained to you as we go through. If during any, and it's not just specific to this, if there's anything during this process that you're unsure about, this is a massive, massive change to your life, ask the question, okay? Even if you think we've told you 3 times, and even if my colleague will turn around to me and say, oh my God, I can't believe they're asking this again, then just ask, because that's the worst thing that's going to happen is someone's going to say, how do they not know this by now? It doesn't matter. You need to be happy. So ask that question for the 3rd time, 4th time, and make sure you know what's going on. Really, really important. But as I say, I think we can do this pretty much all virtually. If we can't, if we come unstuck, then I'm going to hold my hands up and say, well, at least we tried. But for now, we're proceeding at pace.
Excellent. And it's good to hear. I think a lot of people think that recruitment's going to grind to a halt, and there's quite a few chiefs out there. Andy Rhodes from Lancashire, Dave Thompson from West Midlands Police, some that just spring to mind, some really good chief officers there. And they've reiterated over Twitter that, look, you know, keep applying because we need you. And the police aren't going to stop needing good recruits. Actually, they're going to need recruits more now than ever, is my guess. Yeah. And it'd be a brave government, I think, my prediction would be a brave government to say, do you know that 20,000 uplift? You know, difficult economic times, we're going to cancel now because, oh my God.
Well, we don't benefit from that anyway, Brendan, so we're definitely not going to stop.
Yeah. Yeah, but for other forces, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We've got that relationship with the trains, but then again, you know, the finances are going to be very difficult for the train companies as well. So,
yeah, that's true.
Difficult times. I know we'll get through it because, you know, we're the United Kingdom and we're good at that. We'll get through this process, the process of COVID-19. I know we'll get through it, and I know the police are going to, continue to recruit. Just going to have to come up with innovative ways to do that. And you wouldn't be the first force that actually accepts people without having completed vetting and such like. So I think what a lot of forces will do is say that your start date is this date, but it is still conditional on successful vetting, successful medical. I suppose you could even do the fitness at that point as well.
So there was actually a College of Policing circular about the JRFT for initial entry, and that is something that we're going to take at risk. I mean, the 5-4 bleep test is an extremely reasonable level of fitness. So that's something where I'm quite happy to say that, you know, candidates can not even decide for themselves, just do it at home, run up and down the street. It's going to take you 3 minutes. Run up and down the street, whatever it might be. Make sure you can do it. You probably can, by the way. And then just sign yourself off. You're going to have to do it at least once a year anyway. So, you know, get familiar with it now. So that's the sort of thing. But that's all quite practical. That's a lot of common sense being applied to this, which is good.
Yeah, there's, and I think a lot of the time people focus on the recruitment process, but forget important things like ensure that your BMI is at an acceptable level. And practice the bleep test. You know, as one of our Facebook group members the other day took a picture of an empty car park and explained how they're using the car spaces as a way of measuring the distance for the bleep test, and how the security must have thought they were a bit odd because it's a Sunday morning, there's no one in the car park, and they're running up and down the car park, because there's technique in the bleep test as well. So I know 5-4 might seem easy, but there's also the technique of making sure that you don't cross the line, that you're not running ahead of the bleep. Those are the things that will fail you. It's generally not your fitness, it's generally the way you do the bleep test that could fail you and push you back. But look, I think everything's on the table at the moment, isn't it, Tom, in terms of how we recruit and how we get through this but still get people onboarded, because there's not a force in this country that doesn't need to recruit.
Correct.
All right, let's look at some more questions then. So we're not going to get all of these questions done because I did say we'll do about an hour here. Let's have a look at one here. So yeah, if I was to ask a BTP officer what they love about being part of BTP, what would they say?
So I think for me, there's something about you mentioned it before about understanding the culture of the organisation, and I do think genuinely we've got a pretty decent one. So we're not a tiny force, and certainly not geographically, but equally we're not as big as the Met or West Mids or someone like that. So we've kind of got, coupled with our good relationship with the industry and funding and how that's been pretty decent, we've got good resources, we've got good support in the organisation, we can get things done, but the people that work here don't feel like a number, like a small cog in a big machine. There is a bit more of a family feel. There's also the fact that a lot of the work you do, as I say, because of the geographical spread, you are going all over the place. There's a lot of people that you'll meet from doing sort of football serials, for example, and you might be based in Manchester, but then you're in Euston. So there are people that you know, maybe even relatively well, who live and work 200 miles away from you, and then you do training together and so on, and you get to know them better. And that's really nice, because within a lot of home office forces, obviously there's fantastic camaraderie within your station and certainly your team, but does it spread beyond that? Not always necessarily. You share pride in working for the same organisation, but do you know them? No, probably not. But in BTP, you do know them more often than not, or at least by name. And that's a really nice feeling. And for me, there's lots of things I could say, but I think that's the big one.
Yeah, no, I like that. Thanks, Tom. And I can reinforce that, because throughout my career, I've come across a lot of BTP officers, normally in custody, if they're bringing a prisoner into our custody office for whatever reason. And the one thing I've always been really impressed with is the positivity of BTP officers, whereas you'll hear some home office officers grumbling and moaning and using that phrase, TJF, work it out. The jobs.
Not in a good way.
Not in a good way.
But it is.
Sometimes I've never said that in my career. I've quoted it now, but I've never said that in my career. So I always think it's not at all. But one of the things I've always been impressed with is BTP officers is that amazing positivity that they have about their role. I remember the first time I met some of them, I was saying, you're like patrolling railway stations. How do you keep so positive? You're very professional, very positive. I've got to give you that feedback. But what's it like? Because it's just like railway stations, and it would bore me stupid. And then they told me about everything to do with their job, and I thought, all right, okay, that's me told. But that was when I was a young sergeant. All right, okay, should we look at some more questions, Tom, from the group here? So what's the time scale between paper lifting? I think they meant sifting here. This is from Galaxy Note 10 and 5G. Anonymous. What's the time scale between paper sifting and the next stage?
So, that is a real how long is a piece of string question. At the moment, it is quicker than it has been for some time. And actually, we've been moving quite quickly for the last few months. So since the beginning of this year, there have genuinely been instances where someone has applied, been at an assessment centre the next month, and then has an offer 2 weeks later. So, they've gone from applying to offer within 6 weeks, which is fantastic. But there's equally times where that end-to-end process could take 18 months. And that's not, by the way, a good or acceptable situation. And we don't think it is. We don't expect you to have to wait that long. But equally, we're quite keen to make sure that sometimes that can happen. Mm-hmm. At the moment, that's not happening. I think particularly in London and the southeast, where there's a little bit more turnover and demand is just higher anyway, there's quite a quick turnaround there. But I would suggest that from shortlisting to getting a response, you're certainly looking at the most a fortnight. And if you happen to just be picked up, it could be within a day. That's just luck of the draw, if I'm being honest, because they're done on a continuing basis. But then the assessment centres are happening at least once a month, but probably on average about once every 3 weeks. And we've got about 150 people that come through that in a weekend. So we're moving really quickly with people. So right now, I think within a few months, you should have a really solid idea about where your application's at and where it's heading. But again, if you're unsure about any of this, worst case scenario is getting the same answer back. Drop us an email and we'll tell you.
Great stuff. Lovely. Thanks, Tom. And that kind of links in, I think, there about someone's asked a question about, Katie said, got a date for my interview. It's been changed to a telephone interview. Will there be any differences? I think you've addressed that. Also, someone who's working for Her Majesty's Prison Service, been a prison officer for 10 years. Oh my goodness, I doff my cap to you. This requires me to give 3 months notice if asked to be successful. how soon would the training start, and would you take my notice period into consideration? Talk about that one, Tom.
Yeah, so I mean, there are lots of factors that come into play when thinking about the start date. Notice period is a big one, but there are other things. So you might have annual leave and all that sort of stuff. And it is a real juggling act for the people on my team that sort this out. So it is tricky. Ultimately, if you do have a longer notice period, there's not an awful lot that you or I can do about that. And as long as everything else is done and we've ticked all those boxes in terms of the other things we've got to wait for, then we can offer you something with 3 months' notice. And actually, for us, that's a really good position to be in, because then we start to know what's happening in 3 months' time, which is fantastic, because normally we're working a month to a month. So just make sure that you're really clear throughout your application and when coming to accept a conditional offer what your notice period is, so that we can account for that, and then we'll do our best to do that.
Great, lovely. Thanks, Tom. Quick question here then. Another one is, how many officers are you recruiting in this recruitment drive? And this is Simon, who's applying to Liverpool BTP C-section, he believes. So yeah, how many officers? And I suppose it depends on where in the country as well.
Yeah, so this is a much more difficult question to answer than people might think. And you'd had a question for me about what we could do to improve our recruitment process. And I actually think that something that we can do better, it's not specific to BTP, but it's very acute for us with our geographical spread, is our workforce planning, to better inform the recruitment process from the first place. We have to recruit, just very quickly just to explain this, we have to recruit to pools of candidates, because due to our geographical spread, we could be looking at an intake of 20 people, having one person in Birmingham, one in Hull, one in Aberdeen, whatever it might be. And we've got to be able to fill that at the time. We can't turn around and say, oh no, we don't have someone, let's go away and recruit them, because that takes several months. So we need to have a pool of people that go, yeah, they're ready to go, there they are. And that means we have to recruit slightly speculatively. So if our workforce planning was a little bit tighter, that speculative element would be reduced a lot, and we'd be recruiting to fairly sort of sharp numbers. And that is exactly the reason also why you might find yourself waiting a little bit of time. So I would say that if we're recruiting for a location, it means that we do genuinely believe in the next sort of 6 months or so, there will be a need for someone there. There might already be one, or we might be predicting one. When it is that we might need them in what numbers, I can't say with any particular certainty. But ultimately, if there's a location on there and it interests you and you understand that it could be a few months before that particular location came up, then apply and just be ready for that wait if it happens. But we're not recruiting for fun. You know, we don't put out locations just to see what we get. We do it because we genuinely expect to recruit people. The numbers is purely based on our turnover and any changes that might happen. So now and again, one of the tops comes along and says, here's some money, we want some more police officers, and we've got to boost the numbers a little bit. So that all changes. But our intention is to give an offer to anyone that is successful in this process. Whether that's the day after or within 12 months, I couldn't tell you, but you'll get an offer. That's
great, Tom. And actually, I think things have improved, because certainly several years ago, BTP had a bit of a flaky reputation, if it can be as blunt as that, because they were keeping people in the holding bay for like 2 or 3 years, which was chosen for them. Yeah. And it's much better now. I know it's much better, much improved, and that's noticeable. So let's see. So there's a good question here from John. Do you get any help if you're dyslexic?
Yes. So you will be allowed extra time in your online testing. So the assessment process is that you do your competency-based application, which is obviously reviewed. And then if you're successful in that, you do online testing. We don't ask you for any educational requirements whatsoever, because we're going to assess that in the online testing. There are 3 tests, and they are roughly the equivalent to a GCSE grade C, or whatever that is in new money. And then after that point, you're then going to come to your assessment centre. At the assessment centre, no, because you're not doing anything that involves reading or anything like that. You will have the same interview. But for the online testing, you do get extra time. Equally, you don't for the application, because that's entirely, at your liberty to do in your leisure. There's no restrictions on how long that takes you. If there is, dyslexia is extremely common, but sometimes there are other things that come up. If there is anything that you think might require you to have some sort of reasonable adjustment, let us know what it is, and then we'll see what we can do about it. We will always consider something. and we do consider them properly. Sometimes we get things through and you sort of think that doesn't seem really very reasonable, but we won't just say no. We'll go and ask the relevant people and we'll find out. And sometimes it's no, but a lot of the time it's a yes. So if you're not sure and you think you're entitled to something, or would just like to, be put at ease even, then ask the question again.
Great stuff. Thanks, Tom. And I think a lot of forces vary in terms of that reasonable adjustment. There's a statutory requirement to make that reasonable adjustment, but I think there's something you can probably do better there, because I'm sure, I'm not going to mention name and shame, but there's one or two out there who I've seen the emails that have come from them and I've just thought, ooh, I'm not sure if I'd say that to someone, a candidate. Let's see. So Katie's asking, my partner's in the last 12 months of military career. My kudos to your partner, and is currently applying and is wanting to know how many intakes there'll be next year, when they'll start. I think you kind of alluded to that already, haven't you, Tom? So,
yeah, I would suggest there'll be some form of recruitment on an ongoing basis for the next few years, just to, if you look at the picture of policing nationally. That might stop and start, and indeed I hope it does, because then we've got time to play catch up. But if you're in a position to apply, then apply when you can. I always think that that's true, because you might find yourself waiting for a year. But equally, if you need to wait, then wait. Don't sort of put too much pressure on yourself to get into a position which you realistically can't start. It's always better to wait for the right force, for the right location, that's going to work for you. Even if that means waiting a couple of years, do it, because otherwise you have a very difficult couple of years if you do force yourself to go down that path.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. So Luke's asked a question here: is all training done in London? Do C Division have a training centre in the north? And if all the training is it a residential course? Oh, I'm going to add another question onto that as well. If it's residential, what's the quality of the residential accommodation like?
Okay, so that's a really good question, and that is the answer to which has changed very recently. So yes is the short and probably the most fair answer I can give you. Our training is in London. I'm fairly comfortable with that because, firstly, BTP is a London-centric organisation because we police the tube network, and that is the majority of our work, and where you'll find most of our officers. So that is appropriate, and we are a national force. Now, that doesn't mean, therefore, that we should do everything everywhere. It means that we expect people to travel around. It's not practical to do training, for example, for new officers in a particular location anywhere necessarily, because of the fact that, as I mentioned before, there could be ones and twos from all over the country, whereas at least half the intake is generally in London. We don't provide accommodation for them, so that makes sense. I'll come back to the accommodation, but we have just had an intake which is formally started, but their actual training is deferred whilst we sort out everything because of the COVID situation. That's going to be taking place in Liverpool. And that's a really positive step forwards for us because we've managed to get enough people who are in a reasonable location to do it somewhere outside of London. There's some really nice buy-in from some of the local TOCs. I think the CEO of Merseyrail is going to come along and speak to the intake. And that's the sort of thing we want to try and do more of moving forwards. Now, I'm not going to promise that that's going to happen for anyone that applies for a non-London position, or indeed that it will necessarily happen again. But I think it's really indicative of the fact that we want to explore what other options we can have, and sort of try and be as true as possible to being a national organisation. In terms of the accommodation, it's very basic, and I'm not going to tell you it's not. I think if you've been to university, you're probably going to know what to expect. It is exactly like a university halls type accommodation. It is better than it has been. I remember very vividly seeing sort of pictures people sending through, and my answer wasn't to try and spin it to tell them why it was okay. Saying, no, you're right, that isn't good enough. Let's see what we can do. And I'm pleased to say that we have seen what we can do and made some changes. So there has been a lot of improvements. There's a lot more in terms of basic amenities as well, like Wi-Fi and things like that. So it is much, much better than it has been. But I think it's a good example of just being honest about what to expect. And as I say, if you stayed in university halls, you're probably not going to be disappointed. If you're expecting it to be the Ritz, then I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I remember a police accommodation back in the day, back in the 80s and 90s, and it was very ropey. Very, very ropey.
Well, I remember once I did a training course, a specials thing. It was fascinating. It was with the I forgot what they're called now, but the bomb disposal people for the army, and it was the sort of corrugated iron whatever you want to call them, with concrete blocks around it, and that was very eye-opening. So comparatively, maybe it is the Ritz. So you can always do worse. I'll say that much.
I was going to say, as long as it's got a bed, a desk, and a sink's a bonus. But anyway, some of the rooms that police forces have now are starting to be bordering on the sort of plush bed and breakfast. So, but anyway, you're not there for the accommodation.
No.
You're probably going to be so exhausted by the end of the day that you'll do a little bit of studying and then you get your head down and then you'll get up and it'll just be start again. You're there for a purpose, and you know, like you said, it's not going to be the Ritz, but as long as you've got somewhere that's warm, comfortable, and clean, that's the thing I always think. And that's the thing about police accommodation I've always noticed is it's always spotlessly clean, and that's the big difference. That's the thing. I could stay in a Ritz, but if it was dirty, I'd want to stay in a 2-star bed and breakfast that's clean.
Correct.
Alrighty, well listen, there's no more questions from the chat room, and I know we've had a lot of people tune into this, so and there'll be a lot more as well, because I'm going to push this out, a recording of this, onto YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn, and let's see where it takes us. But before, I've got one more question to ask you here, Tom. And it's one we've talked about before, because I met Tom at a conference before Christmas run by Skills for Justice around police recruitment. And we had a good chat, and it got me thinking a lot about the difference between success and fulfillment in an officer's career. So what's BTP doing to ensure that officers have both successful and fulfilling careers?
Cool. Well, I've got a bit of a kind of a generic answer to that question, and also a couple of things I can talk about in terms of BTP. The thing that got me thinking about this is you asked me a question about what kind of roles people like to do, and that kind of leads to fulfillment. I think firstly, you've got to understand why it is you're joining the police, and what it is you're looking to get out of it. Because if you don't understand that, if you don't genuinely, and it is genuine, genuinely care about the job, then you're going to fall at the first hurdle anyway. And you can have what you can define as a sort of successful career, but will you be fulfilled? Possibly not. So if you think about the roles that are on offer, one of the things that's I think particularly appealing about BTP is we do have a really good breadth of roles and different career paths that you can take. And I'll underline all of this by saying there is absolutely nothing wrong with staying as a response PC for your entire career. And even me saying there's nothing wrong with it makes it sound like actually there is. There really isn't. And that is the backbone of all police forces, is that people retire after 30 years, and I hope they still exist in 30 years, having been a response PC the whole time. That's fine, and we need people like that. But if you're driven by something else, and we can offer that too. So I think in terms of the sorts of things that are obvious to people who are applying, we get a lot of questions about being an AFO or a dog handler or something like that. I would say don't join the police because you think you want to do that, because you're not necessarily going to be able to. You'll certainly not be able to do it in the first 2 years, but it might not be an option for various reasons anyway. So have a bit of a meaning behind why you're applying beyond that. But I think also in terms of promotion, that's something that we hear more from people who are looking to transfer. There are better prospects to get promotion within BTP, and if you're that way inclined, then that really is something that you'll find fulfilling. But I've got to go back to it, is that you have to care about the job. You've got to have a reason for wanting to do it. If I think about what I do as a special, for example, a lot of the time, it's actually just the sort of micro interactions that I have with people that kind of, really let me take something away from that shift that's positive, and that keep me coming back for the next time. And that could be as simple as the 50th time I've shown someone where the toilet is in the station that day. And that sounds so trivial, but when you do have the things that are a bit negative, you sort of think, especially as a special, why do I bother doing this for free? But why do I bother doing this job? Actually, those small little interactions, for me anyway, are what makes you think, yeah, this is actually why I do this, because it's something quite trivial, but I'm making a difference to someone's day. And then you get the opportunity to do that in a really, really meaningful way. So when someone's been assaulted, or they've had their property stolen, or there's a mental health situation or something like that, and that is really profound. But you need to have that kind of, this is what gets me out of bed, because there will be days where you don't want to get out of bed, because either you're thinking TJF or whatever it might be, or you're physically tired, but you need to get up and do it. And it's that's going to let you, do that. And that's your fulfillment. And you know, you can still have the sort of traditional measures of success or common measures of success in a career. I would say, by the way, that whilst I think that entry salaries could be better, given the sorts of people we want to apply, that actually salary progression is quite decent. There aren't very many jobs where I can say within 6 years you're going to be on about 40k basic. Very few jobs that you can do that. So by that measure, yeah, you're successful. If you get promoted and you say, I've got this on my shoulder, yeah, that's successful. But ultimately, you know, you're quite right to ask this question. It's got to be about fulfillment, and that's going to be a personal thing. So go into this understanding why it is that you are applying, knowing what it is that you want to get out of it, whether that force will help you to reach that, and you'll have a fulfilling career.
Great answer, Tom. Thank you. And it's one of the things I talk about quite a lot with my clients and the people in the Facebook group is understanding your why. You know, why is this important to you? Why is it important for you to be a police officer? I want to be an AFO. Yeah, but why is it important for you to want to be an AFO? And sometimes I'll have to ask like 5 or 6 questions before someone will go, actually, I don't know. It's just because they're in the military and I think that, you know, that's what I'd be good at. But it's often not the golden moments in your career. So, you know, what are the golden moments you're going to create in your career? And I know you don't know what you don't know, but if you talk to serving officers, this is when you get a feel for actually that the golden moments are more than just, you know, I got promoted to sergeant. I can think of just straight away some golden moments for me. The victim of domestic violence with 2 children who I supported with about 2 years service in 1987. I can still remember the drawing that the children did of this police officer coming to help them as a family. Golden moment. Over in Bermuda Police, I worked for Special Branch. Hey, Gucci job. Was that fulfilling? Not nearly as much as the material I found, the craft material that was stolen in a school burglary that I returned to them, because one of the things that's celebrated every year in Bermuda is making kites at Easter. And it was their kite making kit. And I got that back for them. And they made me a kite, which I flew on Easter Day.
Yeah.
What me? As a neighbourhood inspector, being told by a member of the community who used to badmouth the police 3 years before that he's never felt safer in his community. You know, these are the golden moments. These are the moments that make your career fulfilling, that you can be proud of. Getting the stripes, getting the pips, being an AFO. Think about the why first. And, you know, Tom, you beautifully, you know, talked about it there, that actually to be fulfilled is what's going to make your career. So think about that and definitely think about what it is that's going to make me fulfilled. And actually, what I say to most people is don't go into the police thinking I'm going to be an AFO. Just go in and just be the best version of yourself you can on a daily basis. And once you've got your 2 years in, you'll be amazed at how many options you've looked at. And actually you'll be thinking, why did I think of AFO when actually there's this role? Yeah. I bet you see that a lot, Tom, don't you?
Yeah, big time. And you know, it isn't a problem, as I've said, to want to be a police officer for its own sake, or even necessarily to not quite know why. But you do need to think about it for this exact reason that we've spoken about. You know, what is it that's going to sort of get you out of bed? What's going to tick boxes for you? And will this job deliver that? Because you might find yourself very frustrated after a few years. And it might be really simple things. And for me, it is the simple things. And a lot of the time, it's not even necessarily something I've done. I mean, thinking about some of the things you're saying there made me reflect. And I think one of the best things I ever did, I didn't have to do anything. I was at the, this is obviously a special, I was at the reopening of Manchester Arena, obviously after the bombing, first event that they held there. And I was, it was quite, I remember it vividly because I'd happened to remember at the time, or realise at the time, that I was standing precisely where this bomb had gone off. And I sort of thought, oh, crikey, God, this is a really sort of a poignant place to be. And there were people sort of coming by me, and many of them were in tears, and there were people that, you know, had to have family members that were there and all that sort of stuff. And it was, you know, you could really feel the emotion being there. And a mother of a young girl came up to me who was sort of standing a few feet behind her. And she said, I'm really sorry, I don't suppose we're allowed to take a photo with you, are we? Because she'd quite like to. I said, of course you are. You know, that's not a problem. So pop down, put my hat on there as you do all this, which for me, I love that anyway. Engaging with children is fantastic. But you know, she did that, and she was really sort of looking very timid and shy and nervous before, and she walked off with this massive smile. And I thought, do you know what? All I've had to do is kneel down, put my hat on someone, smile and take a photo. And I've made such a difference. And I've done nothing, but I've made such a difference to that person. And that is the sort of thing that for me, I go, that keeps me coming back. I'm going to be there tomorrow because I get to do things like that. If that doesn't do something for you, and that's fine, by the way, or you've not got something like that, you're going to struggle. So think about what that's going to be for you.
Yeah, great. No, I love that story. And I was just thinking, you know, in 15 years' time, in 20 years' time, people might be calling her mom. It could be an inspector in British Transport Police. This is a sort of inspires others.
You never know.
You just never know. You never know. I hear a lot of people, and they say, well, why do you want to be a police officer? And they talk about all the cliches. And they say, no, where did that seed start? Where was that moment? And they'll say, well, I remember this police officer coming into school. And there's always just something like that.
Yeah.
So who knows there, Tom? Could be the future Chief Constable of British Transport Police. Could have changed their life.
Never know.
Listen, I've got so many more questions I'd love to ask you, Tom, but I did say it'd be about an hour this, and I think we need to sign off now. But
yeah,
look, I'm so grateful for your time. I know you're really busy at the moment with the COVID challenges.
Okay.
I wish you, you know, big thank you from myself, from the heart, and for everyone who's watching this. I know that if there's any further questions, you can, if any of you have got any other questions, you can ask them in the Facebook group, or just drop me a line via Facebook's best way, Facebook page, Bluelight Consultancy, or in the Facebook group. I've already seen there a couple of thanks, Tom and Brendan. I knew I wanted to apply, why I wanted to apply anyway. This has made me excited to start all over again. Oh, that's great to hear.
Good.
Luke saying it's been a massive help. If you're watching this on the replay as well, you can still ask questions. Fire away in the Facebook group. Look, that's a place to go. Just look for the Facebook group, Bluelight Police Recruitment Support Group. Over 10,000 people in there. It turned 10,000 yesterday, Tom.
Well done.
I thought Facebook was going to throw me a virtual party, but
alas. Yeah, and similarly, just on what you said there, if anyone's got any questions about BTP, or whether you're in the process or thinking about it, whatever, recruitment team, all one word, as they like to say, recruitment team at btp.pnn.police.uk. Someone will get back to you. Okay.
That's great. Thanks, Tom. Listen, once again, thank you for your time. I'm going to end the meeting in a moment. And kudos to you for both having the role as a resourcing officer and special constable, giving it your time as a citizen there. Amazing.
There you go.
Please pass on my compliments and my best wishes to all of your colleagues. And stay safe. You know, look after each other, look after yourselves. And thank you again. Thank you again on behalf of everyone.
No worries. Thanks so much, Brendan. Thank you, everyone else.
Bye-bye for now, and bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.